Hey there, Soul Family. Darren Austin Hall here, coming to you. I'm actually streaming right now on Instagram, and then I'll be sending this over on other platforms. And a little frustrated because, initially I was going to stream this live on Facebook. That's where I usually do a lot of my lives, and then I send them out into other places. And Facebook has refused to let me do live videos for well over a week now. Every time I go to do something live, my account gets shut out and I have to change my password and the stream gets killed. So continue to be, censored on Facebook. That's not new. I've gone through shadow banning. I have my ad account permanently disabled now for probably 6 years. But, for those of us who have chosen to continue to just stand in our truth and to speak powerfully and in our sovereignty, that's pretty much the norm these days. And in some ways, it's kind of an indication that you're doing the right thing, getting censored and limited in your expression. And thank God, as we have quite a lot of digital warriors, pushing back, they cannot silence all of our voices. I wanted to share a few things today because I've been, obviously I'm from Canada. I'm living now in Costa Rica, and I've been following the Trucker Freedom Convoy quite closely and really inspired by what's going on, not only in Canada, but in the program. It's incredible effort right now to push back against the forces of tyranny that we're seeing really activated and weaponized against free people on Earth right now. And we really need to keep this focused because the media and now social media has created this incredibly immense matrix of mind control. And the way that mind control is really playing out right now is they've created a lot of divisions between people, and a lot of this is played out in the rise of identity politics and, creating an island for each, so many different it's basically fractured society, so many different political voices, and it's been really, really hard for people to figure out what's the universal terrain that kind of strings us all together in a common cause. That is until we've now seen this grand pandemic and the lockstep of all these governments working together, particularly in like the G8, of which Canada is a member of. They've been pretty much following the agenda of the World Economic Forum. So is Costa Rica here, actually. And the Agenda 2030 being set for the Great Reset. All the governments of the G8 and other governments as well have been adopting this. And so if you want to really get a sense of why there's so much frustration and anger in the population and why there's so much anxiety about, the pandemic being exploited to bring forth all these other measures that really have nothing to do with the pandemic, research the World Economic Forum, look into Agenda 2030. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can read up on it yourself and see what is this kind of 10-year plan that they've been trying to initiate since 2020. And Klaus Schwab, who's been ahead of the Economic Forum, I think, since the 1970s, has said very openly that, the pandemic gives them a very good opportunity to reshape the world. And that's why a lot of people are rising up right now, because they're seeing these power grabs that are happening, these really immense radical tectonic shifts in how society and civilization at large is being now orchestrated and transformed into this kind of techno-tyranny, transhumanist agenda. And I mean, you just look at like the ads they put out for Agenda 2030 about, by the year 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. It's very dystopian, and people have to be aware that a lot of the people who are pushing back are seeing this. They're watching this information, and they're being, in my mind, they're having a lot of foresight. So like, okay, they've pretty much set out their long-term plan, and it's not hidden, and we need to really push back against that agenda because it's very pointed. There's a very significant bias there that is not agreeable to a lot of people. So I hope people just maintain that focus, because when you look at what's happening in Canada right now with the Freedom Trucker Convoy, and you look at how it's spawning now movements. I know there's a trucker convoy in Australia, I think now, in Finland, in Germany apparently, Brazil, in the UK and in the US of A as well. There's like these, starts of these kind of things because freedom's contagious, and all it takes is a few courageous, brave human beings to really break through the matrix of authoritarian control, and then people gain a sense of solidarity in that. But if you watch what the media is trying to do, they're doing pretty much the political bidding of the elite who are basically ruling us in the halls of corrupt power all over the world. And they're pretty much playing by the normal playbook. So anyone like myself who studied political propaganda knows, that the first thing you do, and I shared a beautiful video, and I'll continue sharing it by this beautiful African Canadian young woman who just like put this together so concisely. And that's the other amazing thing, is a lot of the people who are on the ground, and it's a very multi-diverse group of races and minority groups and different religions and different creeds. I mean, that's part of what's so captivating for people, and just to see that there is this profound transcendent unity that's coming together. A lot of these people have, studied up, and they've probably been to protests before, and they've seen the tactics that the government uses and the media uses, because you have to keep this in your frame of mind. Whenever there is a very powerful protest movement that threatens government power, like this one most certainly does. I mean, we're already seeing 2 provinces in Canada, Saskatchewan and Alberta, dropping their mandates in direct response to what they're seeing on the ground. I know that there were some MPs from the Saskatchewan government here in Canada who literally said they went in earnest to actually support the convoy. And when they saw, I think there was like 1.4 million Canadians there on the first weekend, when they saw the magnitude of voices, they came back to Saskatchewan. They're like, yep, I think the people have spoken. We need to get rid of these mandates. So it's a real threat to the government power. I think it was yesterday Justin Trudeau even walked out of Parliament in a kind of infantile temper tantrum, which is great too. And I've mentioned, if you want to see toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and colonialism right now being, kind of in its death throes, just look at the workings of the Shadow King in Justin Trudeau right now, just veering back and forth in the pendulum swing between tyrant king and weakling king. Compassion to Justin, I hope he figures it out, but right now he's giving us a great lesson in what happens when men aren't properly initiated into nobility, and he's just doing the bidding of his own oligarchic controllers, unfortunately. Unfortunately, he's just a mercenary for them. But what we have to remember is the political tactic is this: when a movement threatens the government and threatens politics authentically, their most powerful weapon is to other the protesters. They have to somehow demonize them, make them into monsters in the media to shape public opinion, to create an opposition to them. And the easiest way to do that is to use all these triggers that they've been slowly like planting and seeding in our mind in media. And what's really tricky about this is that a lot of these triggers are actually authentic things. Like racism is a problem. It's something that we should be opposed to. White supremacy, white nationalism, all these things are anathema. They're reprehensible, and they should be, and they are being denounced by the people on the ground. But what they've done is they've created these ideas in people. And remember, this is from the very government who is still exuding the actual colonial power, who is exuding actual racism. And this is in the Nazi playbook, right? I think it was Himmler who said, accuse them, your enemy, of what you are actually doing. And you create this horrendous duplicity and manipulation, because then everyone looks at them thinking, oh my God, they're the racists. While meanwhile, the racists are getting away with everything, which is what's occurring right now. So there's been this obvious and very aggressive propaganda that's been going on to shape the protesters as this kind of, other triggering words right now for the collective, like an alt-right, white supremacist, white nationalist movement. And that's not to glean over the fact that there's obviously factions of those kinds of belief systems in some of the movement. But it's a very small amount of that. And yes, some of the organizers probably have political views that are reprehensible. But, that just goes into a much broader conversation about, how are we going to really unify unless we really talk about all these different views that everyone has. But what this African Canadian young woman so, perfectly said was that the people on the ground, if you go to the protests, if you actually see the thousands and thousands of Canadians who are there from so many different groups, so many different races, you'll see that they don't care about who the organizers are. They're there to actually start a grassroots movement themselves. This is not about the organizers' political beliefs, and it's out of the hands of the organizers in a lot of ways. You're actually witnessing something very new and transcendent happening there. But you have to hold it all, and we are reaching a point right now where we're kind of in this postmodern quagmire where belief systems are starting to really corrode and collapse. And yes, people are in those moments of fear and panic, they're gravitating towards extremism on both sides of the equation. I've been trying to highlight for the last couple of years to a lot of my friends who are on the left, because I don't actually see myself connected to either side, although people increasingly try and pigeonhole me on the right, which of course is another political tactic, because the right is, at least in the leftist media, the ones that are like the most demonized. So it's so easy to just label someone that way, and then all of a sudden you have a gang of people who are against you. But I've been trying to point out to both people on the right and the left that there's an extreme side. There's an alt-left, there's an alt-right, and we call it neoliberalism. And both of these sides are kind of manipulating public opinion. But what I want people to realize is that what's happening in this movement on the ground, if you actually see the beautiful videos that are coming forth, is that there's a lot of people who are not connected to any political spectrum. They're actually emerging beyond that. And this is a very nascent and early, fresh innovation that's happening. And all over the world, you're starting to see these seeds of people who are actually stepping outside of politics, and they're trying to really shape a whole new universal identity of what it means to be just human. And this is why I've also been really into eco-spirituality, because I do think the environmental movement, if it's really contextualized in the right way, using Mother Earth as kind of the common sacred ground for us all, and why indigenous wisdom, I think, is so much more universally appealing in crafting this universal identity of us all being kind of indigenous peoples of the earth. This is why these things are really important. And the thing is, it's so nascent, it's so early, that it's very hard for people to really see it, because people have been so conditioned since pretty much, young, when they were very young in the education system, we've been really conditioned to just use our intellects to analyze reality through this left-right brain dualistic thinking. So when there's someone who's actually transcending the duality, who's like not a leftist, not a rightist, it's like impossible for a lot of people to see that. They're so conditioned to just always have a label ready. And the labels themselves are really destructive and dehumanizing, and I've had to deal with in the last few weeks, since I've been very outspoken about this protest. I've had so many people like lobbing these labels at me, like very hateful messages. I've had to block a few friends, try to engage them in dialogue, and it's just, once you're labeled something and you're othered in some way, they don't see you as human anymore. They just see you as a set of values, and it's been kind of shocking to just witness the amount of assumptions that people start to make about you when they've labeled you in this stereotypical way. But what's amazing, if you see what's emerging on the ground, there's been these counter-protesters that have been showing up, and the protesters on the ground are really following nonviolence. They're really starting to embody and galvanize what Gandhi was really talking about, which is, if we bring this force of active love, this soul power, into the protests, you start to, first of all, you create a very powerful contrast, because you start to see who is really for love, peace, and unity, and who is really against that. And if you do not feed, if you're not provoked into that conflict, the person who's trying to create that opposition and conflict, they will just start to get louder and louder and more kind of disgusting in their own hate, because their only weapon is to actually use hatred to sort of trigger your own hatred of them, and then you're lost into a conflict, and then it's very hard to see the lovingness, it's very hard to see the righteousness of the peaceful movement, because you're just like stuck. And this is why, agent provocateurs have been a great tool of, the corrupt political elites. and why they've thrown in many protests. You can watch lots of videos. I've been sharing that famous one from way back in 2000 in Quebec, where they had these black bloc kind of Antifa protesters who were clearly they were found out that the Quebec government had to admit that they were undercover police who were trying to incite the peaceful protesters into violence, because when you incite them into violence, then it's so much easier to justify, arrest them and punish them. But I have to admit, people are holding so strong, and they're getting playful as well. They're getting creative, because the police, had started to confiscate the gas, which to me is like really egregious. Like, there's families there, and they're trying to stay warm. They're trying to stay secure in a cold Canadian winter. Like, I mean, props. You got to have at least some respect for these truckers. It's cold. It is cold in Canada right now, and so the police started confiscating their fuel, which could put their lives in danger. That's not a very safe thing to be doing. And so wonderfully, Canadian citizens, because they also put out this edict that Canadian citizens could be arrested if they were bringing fuel to the truckers. And amazingly, you see these images now of families, of protesters, even children coming with like gas canisters, and that is amazing. So now the cops are like, how we can't do anything, we can't arrest all these people. And the cops are having to be very careful here. First of all, a lot of the police are starting to break ranks, because this isn't like any other protest. This is like, people are witnessing that these mandates are they're not only egregious, they're just illegal, and they're very dangerous. Like, and this is where, it's been really shocking, but at the same time not surprising, because social media has been so weaponized and have been so controlled. But people have to realize like what people are fighting against here. Like, they're literally coercing people with the threat of losing your job, putting your life in danger. I mean, the suicide rate, people have families, people are just trying to have their own livelihood. Some people are newly landed immigrants, and if someone doesn't want to get this vaccine, in the face of all this science that's showing that the vaccines have been really the only thing left is like sort of this argument that they like limit your hospitalization time, but even that there's not much proof to that, especially in all of the science of like how effective all these alternative therapies are. They shouldn't really be called alternative therapies. It's a really egregious thing, and there should be, and there is, this growing solidarity now of all these millions of Canadians and millions of people all over the world who are showing that their own common sense is not going to be betrayed, and they're finally standing up after years of just being bludgeoned, their sovereignty being bludgeoned by these authoritarian regimes all over the world that are masquerading as democracies. People are standing up, and people need to realize that's why there's such an appeal to this protest, and that's why it's like all across races, because this is like this is a whole other level of tyranny. And that's not to say we have to keep the work going in terms of like protecting Indigenous lands, and really make sure that, if this protest really continues to break through, there are all these other causes that need to be swept into this, because we don't want to whitewash this. We don't want this to become just about, getting rid of the mandates. There's much bigger things that are also at stake here. We've been dealing with the erosion of the natural environment for decades upon decades, and just listening to one false promise after another by these political elites, and they like to virtue signal all the time and say they're for, Black Lives Matter and Indigenous rights. It's all fucking bullshit. They're not for any of these things. They're actually very dangerous racists in power, but they use, all this media, all this programming to really make it seem like they're actually on the side of moral righteousness and being ethical, and they're just not. And I've been really surprised to just see how many people that, identify as anarchists and activists and stuff, just kind of like standing behind the government on this, and a lot of the medical science, which has been, completely co-opted by pharmaceutical profiteering. And yeah, so it's been a little disappointing, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I studied media information technology university. I know how savvy the deceptions are, and now they have all this social media at their disposal. So, but to sum up, what's really great is that people are savvy to this. There's so many young people who are part of this movement. I've just been so blown away by the intelligence of these young people. young people of color, young people of all different races, all different dispositions, and they are wise to the tactics. It's really amazing to just see this fiercely enlightened generation coming forward. They know social media. They know how all these algorithms work, and they're very educated, and they're pushing back. And at the same time, you're just seeing all these amazing Canadians, very working class Canadians, just coming together in love. And that's the last thing I really want to sum up here. I've had, you know, so blessed to see a lot of my friends actually on the ground in Ottawa. And look, if there's any advice I can give to anyone who's been, you know, really disgusted at what's going on the ground and fearful of what's going on the ground, just if you can go to Ottawa yourself, I really, like, I wish I could. I'm so far right now in Costa Rica, but just seeing the videos every day, some of my friends are literally there. They're living in the Convoy. And the videos they show every day, there isn't hate going on. There's no hate groups. There's no Nazi flags. There was like one Nazi flag, one Confederate flag on the first day, which really makes it suspicious. And there's just none of that. There's just love. There's people hanging out and really just like this incredible solidarity. So if you can go to Ottawa yourself, I challenge you. You know, if you're on the side of this where you're seeing this as like some alt-right hate group, I challenge you, go to Ottawa and like seek out that hate, like go and find it. And if you find it, like document it and really show it to people. Because I literally have friends who went there looking for that. Like one of my friends is literally posting like, I'm looking for them every day and I can't find them. So just be aware that the media is, you know, they're very distrustful. So is the government. Like, and if you take a long view of political propaganda, it sort of makes a lot of sense that they're using every weapon at their disposal right now, because this is truly a massive movement, and it's already, you know, there's casualties happening in the government in terms of like, you know, the mandates are getting dropped. This is actually ramming through the tyrannical wall, and that's fucking exciting. So, you know, I'm sending a lot of support to the truckers, sending a lot of support to the convoys, a lot of support to all people, you know, of color, minority groups who are, you know, having to deal with being labeled white supremacists and all this, like, that they're all this tokenism and internalized racism, all this like absolute bullshit. Like, really just see the voices. Like, there are so many voices. And yeah, this is not a perfect protest. It's never going to be absolute. It's never going to be that way. There's never been a civil rights movement that was like 100% like clean and righteous. There's always going to be, you know, this messiness, this clumsiness. But one thing that's for sure is that there are a lot of multiracial voices from all over the world. And that's what's so captivating about this movement, is that people are realizing that this is a thing that's going to bring us together, you know, and that people are ready to step into a world where racism is crushed, where patriarchy is crushed, where people are really coming together in the One Heart Revolution, as one of the indigenous elders spoke at the protest. And that's what is really being seeded here. That's what's been really is being grown. That is the majority of what is going on the ground. And go and see for yourself. That's the challenge, and make sure you pay attention to people who are on the ground. Follow them. I've been sharing POC for Freedom Convoy on Instagram. But once you go into POC for Freedom, because people like accusing me, oh, this you're just following this one account. But if you follow this amazing young woman who's created this account, People of Color for Freedom Convoy, just go into all of her source material. Go to all the people of color that she's sharing. Go and follow their accounts, and you'll just see that it's a massive movement of people from all over the racial spectrum, and that's what's so exciting about this. So, go Canada, go Freedom Trucker Convoy. I hope this love movement spreads all over the world, and I hope the hate groups, you know, are confronted as they are being and denounced, and that we continue to forge this sacred solidarity of a truly universal movement around the incredible powers of love and, you know, the universalism of our humanity. Sending y'all so much love. Share this message far and wide if you really dig it, and talk again soon.